I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from New York City. And don't you love a live show when your host just jumps the gun? Let's start again. Welcome to CMO Huddles Studio, made possible by our friends at Restream. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from New York City. And I'm hoping you don't mind if I get something off of my chest. About once a week, I see an agency person or a B2B CMO pronounce on social media some variation of, there is no B2B or B2C, only B2H, as in business to human. This is supposed to be a revelation, a clarion call, if you will, for B2B marketers to wake up and start acting like B2C marketers. It's not a revelation. In fact, it's pure speculation. It simply doesn't reflect the reality of buying committees, lengthy sales cycles, and months-long proofs of concepts that B2B folks have to implement. I'd like just one of these B2B CMOs or one of the pundits to step into a B2B role using the exact same playbook and prove me wrong. Because until then, let's just embrace the differences. And better yet, let's focus on the trends that are affecting B2B marketers right now. And to help us do that, we have two amazing CMOs. First up is Jon Miller, CMO of Demandbase and star of episode 25 of the predecessor of this show, Renegade Marketers Live. Hello, Jon. How are you?
Hello. Live from Burlingame, California.
Awesome. And I don't mean to diss on B2C. I love B2C. And I do think there are things that perhaps that B2B marketers can learn, but can we just get over that and acknowledge the differences and how profound they are?
I agree 100%. Something I don't talk about a ton. My wife has a B2C business. And I try to help her with the marketing. And honestly, sometimes I'm at a loss. My B2B skills don't necessarily apply to her world and vice versa. So I agree 100%.
All right. Okay. Well, you've written several ebooks, and it's known that some famous writers have some weird practices to get in the writing mood. Agatha Christie ate apples in the bathtub. Dan Brown has been known to hang upside down. Is there a certain tradition or routine that you go through to get into the writing process?
Gosh, I wish I had a story quite as interesting as one of those. I'll tell you my process. It starts with research. I'll just create a document and just dump notes into it from anything that I can find. And that's a pretty lengthy process. I really kind of, end up with a lot of research. And then I apply synthesis. If somebody asked me what is my number one superpower, I would say it's synthesis. I just take all this information and synthesize it down into something. And then caffeine kicks in. I actually don't normally drink very much caffeine. If you see me sipping coffee today, I'm drinking decaf. But when I'm sitting down and writing, that little injection of caffeine is where the magic happens.
Amazing. Okay. All right. You can definitely catch Jon's appearance on episode 25. We're going to share the links in the show notes and in the live show. So we did this demo huddle back in 2022, October to be last, which seems like forever ago. And you identified these three buying trends, all pointing to a more complicated buying process. Buyers want to research anonymously. Buying committees are larger and more complicated, and the buying process is non-linear and looping. First of all, are these relevant trends that you're advising clients to focus on, or have things changed?
I think they're still really relevant. I think what's really going on, you talk to CMOs, I talk to go-to-market executives all the time. I think the fundamental trend, though, is it just feels like it's hard out there today. It feels like no matter what I do, it just isn't working as well as it used to work. There's almost like a B2B playbook, I think that companies are following. And in some ways, I think I helped write that playbook back in my days at Marketo. And what I'm seeing in my business and our customers' businesses, and I talk to CMOs, is that playbook just doesn't work as well as it used to. I think buyers have gotten indifferent. They just don't want another ebook. To be honest, and they don't want that other email. They know they're going to get unwanted phone calls if they download things.
Yeah, I mean, I think
we're scrambling and looking for that new playbook. So
and
it's hard there.
In that, it's a real question. This is like a pivotal moment, because is it a question of a playbook per se? And maybe it is, or is it a question of they're just not making, they're just putting off purchase decisions, because unless you can prove that you are either going to have a quick ROI or that, it's going to change someone's life overnight, then they're just saying, this is nice to have, but not need to have. And so it's less about a playbook and more about the reality of buyers' pocketbooks.
I mean, I'm not going to say the economy doesn't matter here. I mean, it does, but I think that this feeling of, gosh, it's just not working as well anymore. I actually think that predated the sort of budget cuts that we're seeing now. And the other part is so budgets are down 15, 20%. That still means there's a lot of purchasing happening, and so I don't want to blame that this gosh, it's hard, on just the economy. I really do think it's a more fundamental change in buying that requires a change in how we market and sell.
Okay, so let's think about then let's go through these three big trends and go through them one at a time with the lens of sort of thinking about it differently, what might be broken. So buyers want to research anonymously. And let's talk about that journey that those folks are going. And, do we have to look at that journey differently and how you interact with them?
Yeah, I mean, and I think what we fundamentally need as we sort of think about the kind of like this new smarter playbook that ties to this anonymous buying trend is something that well, let's break it down by the buyer's journey, right? Just something simple: awareness, consideration, decision, right? So in that awareness stage, these are the buyers who don't even know they have a problem yet. Right. And, if you start emailing those people or calling them, you're going to hit a stone wall. These people don't know to even come to your website to download your ebook. Right. So we have to start with, how do we try to help these other anonymous buyers who aren't even aware they have a problem to become aware that their problem exists? And ideally aware of who our company is. So that way there's some trust built as they start to move to the next phase.
And that's it. So just on that alone, is because, I think some of that depends on where you are from a market share standpoint. Are you having to sell the problem, or can you just sell the solution to the problem that people are doing? And I suspect it's the maturity of the category and also where you are. But creating the problem is a whole different, or creating an understanding of the problem is a whole different communication mechanism than, say, buy us because we're the best at solving this problem.
Totally. And I think this is where the old playbook, my Marketo playbook, falls down, right? We've gotten so good at demand capture, with the traditional playbook, that we've sort of lost the art of actual true demand creation. And fundamentally, we're talking about emotion versus logic here. The traditional playbook is really about like trying to connect to somebody with their brain and all that. And what we need is more of that emotional reptilian, stuff that's hitting the reptilian brain, creating some fear or some want, to help people say, hey, maybe I do have a problem and something needs to change. And here's maybe a company that I should trust, And so it's something marketers have not been very good at in the last few years. And I think it needs to change. Then, there is a point when the buyer is going to move into the awareness stage. And from awareness into the consideration stage, which is now like they understand they have a problem and they're going to start thinking about solutions, right? This is where our job is to identify that moment, right? Because that's actually now where there's an openness to us potentially reaching out, to moving from that emotion to logic. Ideally, we've created some foundation of trust, in our brand, so they're a little more receptive to when we reach out. But finding these magic moments, what I call the marketing qualified account, that's showing intent and buying signals and then reaching out at the right time, is the next key part of the playbook. And then the last part of the playbook, which we'll talk about in a minute, I think, is a different relationship between marketing and sales as you enter into that decision phase, where they're now actually choosing and evaluating solutions.
Yeah. And it's funny, I'm now going back to our conversation 11 years ago or so when you were at Marketo, and it was so much about, in some ways at that time, we were just talking about, you were serving up people that were so ready to buy to sales, you could actually pay sales less. So it was all about, at that moment, it was demand creation through content, demand capture through the visit. Okay. So what do you, and let's just stay on that topic of thinking about the challenge of marketing and sales. I mean, what are we trending here? I mean, sales guys are frustrated because they're not closing as many deals. And they're looking at marketing and saying, what, the deals aren't very good?
Well, I mean, in the old playbook, right, that handoff between marketing and sales is the lead, right? And it's kind of like a relay baton pass in a relay race. And, classically, what sales going to do, right? They're going to kind of, say, hey, the leads aren't good enough. Usually you get they're not good enough more than you get there's not enough, because there's not enough, marketing will just start sending over more bad stuff. And, again, what's going on? Why are the leads, quote unquote, not good enough? And I think it has a lot to do with following the old traditional playbook, right? Where you're just trying to kind of, quote unquote, capture that demand using, the ebook and all that kind of thing. And those aren't buying signals, right? Just because someone downloaded your book or attended your webinar doesn't mean they're buying signals. So don't pass that over to sales and say, hey, here's an MQL. What needs to happen is a fundamental change in how marketing and sales work and work together, right? I've written about this a bunch online. It's not a relay race. It's a soccer team or a football team, where you're all on the field at the same time. Sure, you're playing different positions, but you're on the field at the same time and you're passing that ball back and forth, in a very orchestrated, sort of way. And to make that work, you need really good communication. You need good teamwork, and what enables really good communication is sharing account intelligence. Making sure that the sales team knows, hey, when something is happening at the account, when those buying signals are happening, when intent is being shown, and so on. And frankly, sales telling marketing what's happening at the account.
We have a question from Eric Choi. Is the concept of SAL, SQL basically out of date?
A lot of people would say yes. The kind of the traditional, SQL or whatever is kind of out of date. Now, some nuances to that. For a lot of companies, the SQL means a meeting. And a meeting is still a really relevant metric, and particularly because a meeting happens with a buying group at an account, typically not kind of that one single person. So more generally, I think what you're asking are leads out of date. And I would argue, if you are a high velocity, low value business, or low ACV business, leads still work. And they worked for me in the early days of Marketo with a relatively low price point. But if you start selling something that's more than $50,000 a year, you need to be thinking about buying committees and accounts, and your sales, and you need to be thinking about sales and marketing working together, much more like a soccer team or a football team than a relay race.
So Here's, I guess, the question as I'm thinking about the soccer team metaphor. Is the distinction between sales and marketing just so old school and artificial? I mean, because we've talked about this in huddles where marketing's role never stops, right? You get the meeting, you have the buying committee. Now those buying committee are continuing to do research. You're monitoring that research.
Yeah,
Oh,
totally.
there may be another thing. You may actually think of something from a marketing standpoint that you could put in front of them that could really help, right? So if marketing's job never stops, what what is sales
Yeah.
doing that marketing isn't doing?
Well,
Going to a meeting?
no, and sales should be also, by the way, involved before. I mean, if you're trying to get an executive to show up at a dinner, right, they're not going to show up because they got an HTML email from marketing. They're going to show up because a human invites them. So my point is marketing and sales are working together at every stage, but there are still different roles and positions. Let's talk about American football, right? You have your linemen and you have your wide receivers, right? Like they're all on the same team and they're working together, but they're still doing very different things. And to make the team work, you need all the people doing their very unique, special things, but in an orchestrated way. So I'm not saying sales goes away or marketing goes away any more than I would say you don't need all these different players on a team, right? What I'm saying is they have to work together with more teamwork.
Okay. So the sort of a trend that we skipped a little bit, we talked about buying committees. And to me, this is probably the biggest difference between a B2B and a B2C play is that there are, Gartner's been estimating 14 people, but even if it's only 8, there are a lot of people. And I think it tends when there's a recession, there's more people on the committee because frankly, nobody wants to be the guy who made the decision to buy the $100,000 software. So lots of people are involved. How do you then anticipate the needs? I mean, that's part of the solution is anticipating the needs, but how do you make sure when you're just dealing with committees, buying committees, that we're addressing those?
Yep. Well, first off, I don't want to say it's easy. It's another fundamental problem with the old playbook, right? Which was, didn't really think about buying committees, first and foremost. So, all right, how do we make this hard thing a little bit easier? I mean, the first step is just you got to be able to identify who are the members of the buying committee. And you need to be able to, frankly, if you don't have the right people in your database, you got to build that out kind of over time. It requires then, I will say intent data can be a pretty useful tool here because different members of the buying committee tend to use different kinds of keywords and tend to research different kinds of articles based upon their unique needs. That helps you, like even in your advertising, message to different members of the buying committee appropriately based upon the types of intent that they show. So it's a little more complicated than one size fits all messaging. You've got to do a little more segmentation. But
yeah, and more segmentation and more insight, right? Because if you're communicating with a CFO or a CIO or a CISO or whatever, they really coming from different places. So anyway, we can get into this, keep going, but I want to welcome Allyson Havener, the VP of Marketing of TrustRadius and star of episode 27 and 42 of Renegade Marketers Live. Hello, Allyson. Wonderful to see you again.
Hi, Drew. How's it going?
Fine. Thank you. So how are you and where are you?
I'm doing well. I'm in Austin, Texas. We just had our field kickoff this week. So I'm coming to you live from a hotel lobby.
Very cool. Well, that's funny. The sales kickoff, that's sort of what, Jon and I were talking about, bringing together a collaboration. But before we get into the trends, we learned from previous live shows that you once taught dance in Abu Dhabi and were a master ice cream maker in your youth. Yeah. I have to ask, what's a fun fact that may surprise us about you? Now, we already know those two.
I know. I think that's the only interesting things I do. But actually, one funny thing I was thinking about it, I just officiated my best friend's wedding. So That was really fun and just a really great experience. And officiating a wedding is much more difficult than actually being in the wedding. So it was a great experience and really excited for my friend. And I actually introduced her to her husband now. So it was, it all came full circle.
Oh, that's amazing. It's such a great story. It's funny because our daughter got married last summer, and the
Oh,
gentleman
congrats.
who was the officiant was the guy who introduced my son-in-law to my daughter. So, and he was great. So it was fun. It's such a personal thing when that happens. So
Yes.
that's very, very cool. So, all right. On the demo huddle, your CEO,
Mhm.
Vinay, identified these 3 buying trends, B2B buying trends. Buyers want to self-serve, which I want to go into a little bit more. Buyers trust third-party resources over first-party resources. Makes
Mhm.
sense. And sales has dropped out of the top 5 sources of influence, which, John and I were sort of talking about it,
Mhm.
and I was wondering, so what's sales really doing? Anyway, first of all, are those 3 trends still relevant? And to, I mean, it's only a few months later, but is anything changed with those?
They're still very, very relevant. And I think what you and John were just talking about is like this like playbook is changing. And so we do this research report every year called the B2B Buying Disconnect. And essentially what it does is we survey over 3,000 buyers that come to TrustRadius that are doing research. And we want to understand like what do they want and what is the disconnect between what they want and how they want to interact with a brand or a seller or vendor, and the way a vendor goes to market. And I think those 3 trends are super, super relevant, and they're only becoming not a trend, but it's really the reality that we're living in. However, what we're seeing is that the marketing team or the go-to-market team is not necessarily adapting to that, or maybe not adapting fast enough. And so I think what you're seeing also is, okay, that disconnect is happening, and what you and John were talking about, the old tactics or the old playbook isn't working, and it's because buyers intrinsically want to buy differently. And what you're also seeing, you were kind of talking about this B2C versus B2B, but they're consumers at the end of the day, right? And so there's buying committees, there's definitely nuances, and there's differences to that. But what you're seeing is that, as a consumer, you want things you want information upfront, easy to find. You want to do it on your own. You don't want to have to deal with sales to get pricing, to get a demo, right? They're not the gatekeepers anymore of information. And people, especially as more millennials and Gen Zs come into the buying committee and in places of leadership, they're digital natives, right? And so they're used to finding all this information easily, right? They're talking to their friends, part of their buying habits that are only transcending into B2B now.
So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the self-serve motion, because I totally agree that's, we as humans have become very good at disintermediating anywhere we can. If we can go to a website and buy our ticket or whatever it is, we will do it. It's still, I think, a very different process than, because if I go and say, hey, I'm going to make a quick trip to California, I can just do that. I don't have to ask anybody. That's the difference. As a consumer, I can just get out my credit card. That's not the way it works with most business to business, right? I could do my homework, but I still got to get the CFO and the CEO, and that's all sorts of other folks. And that's, to me, where it breaks off. But focus on the self-serve for a moment, given, and I want to add the complexity layer of self-serve plus buying committee, and how does that
Mhm.
play out?
Right. So when we talk about self-serve, it goes back to just being able to find information that you need when you're making that short list, right? And so when we surveyed buyers, the top 3 resources that they wanted to find upfront and easily is pricing, demos or free trials, or signing up for a free trial easily, and then customer stories, reviews, anything that's a kind of like that validation. Because I think in a market today, right, technology especially in software, markets are oversaturated. It's really hard to differentiate. Everyone's messaging starts sounding the same, and buyers are skeptical. So they're not going to just go to your website and believe everything that's on there. They're going to be validating that. And so I think with self-service, it's the brands that are giving that information up front. They're actually building trust with the buyer because they're not gatekeeping important information. I think that, the engagement with sales is still super, super important. But that role is evolving as well. And again, I think they're not that gatekeeper of information. The other thing that we're seeing with self-service is, like I said, that validation. And so we see at TrustRadius, people are still buying software. People are still researching. We see that. But what we have also seen is that when vendors add pricing, their click-through rates increase quite a bit because the buyers are getting the information, they're building that trust, and then they want to get in touch with them. So the more information that they're actually putting on their product profile, the higher click-through rates that they're seeing, that they actually want to get in touch with sales. And so I think that's just a validation that, again, buyers want this self-serve and they want this information up front.
And so just to clarify, so this is someone going to TrustRadius, evaluating, reading a write-up about a piece of software. And at that moment, the pricing information is right there. And when it is there, you get more clicks than when it is not.
Exactly.
What's wonderful about what you have is there's got to be a laboratory for almost everything. In
Right.
a sense, if you add it, like I'm imagining you can add a demo click. Like there isn't,
Right.
by the way, there is no category for B2B CMO communities on TrustRadius.
Yeah.
But if there was, CMO Huddles would be there tomorrow. And we would put pricing. Demos are a little tricky, but maybe we could put free trial. But and we certainly could put reviews. But I'm curious, this gives you a chance to test and advise, right?
Right.
So other than pricing, what is it links to demos? Is that another thing to add?
So we actually just added this partner that does like interactive demos. So you can have all your interactive demos on your actual product page. They can start to see more of the product, and it's like that hands-on experience that they're trying to understand. And so that's super important. We also just partnered with somebody that does like security documentation. So that's another, like if you think about security documentation in legal, and anybody in sales is like cringing right now because there's nothing that can stop a deal faster than security information in a legal team. And so if you can provide that legal documentation and kind of like your posture up front, that also helps, right? And it's all about accelerating the deal cycle. You and Jon were talking about buying cycles are getting longer and more arduous. But if you give all this information up front, you're going to get more qualified buyers that they're thinking, okay, great, this is fitting in my budget. Great, there's people that are like me at a same size company, same role that are buying this and they love it. Oh, great. All their security documentation. Oh, I did a demo. Like if you think about it, you're accelerating that deal cycle and you're making it easier for them. And so I think that that's really important when you're thinking about your strategy as a marketer, as a sales team, is that if you actually give buyers all that information up front, you're accelerating that deal cycle and getting more qualified buyers in the pipeline.
Well, what's interesting is about the stage. So Jon and I were talking about one of the big challenges is that first stage before they even get to TrustRadius, they have to have an inspiration. They have to identify a problem and then go start to look at the solution, which is where you come in. But I would imagine, and this is a guess, that your business should be really healthy in the sense that because it's so hard to find people that are ready or in the buying mode right now, that these folks are probably more likely to buy than folks that don't check out third-party sites, right? Because they're serious.
Right. Exactly. Like they're ready to make that purchase decision and they're creating that short list. And so you need to be, and it's wherever your buyers are, right? TrustRadius is just one destination. They're in forums, they're on social. It's wherever those eyeballs are, and you want to be capturing that. And I totally agree with you. I think that a balance is creating demand and setting that problem. And I think even with like our marketing and one thing that I've always done is when you think about creating demand is like you want to find either like these macro trends that are happening in the market that you can tie yourself to. At my previous company, I was at a company called LiveRamp, and we worked in kind of the data onboarding, digital advertising space. And a big concern was privacy. GDPR, CCPA, and all this was coming out. And we were like, we need to be a thought leader because there's like this problem that's happening and we want to be associated with it. We want to be a thought leader. We're creating. And so when people think of like, okay, how am I going to solve for GDPR? Or how am I going to solve for CCPA? Our brand comes to mind. And I think, so you're creating this demand, you're associating yourself with this problem, this macro trend that's happening in the market. And then you couple that with being able to capture that demand. That's super, super powerful. So I totally agree with like that balance. Like you can't just be thinking about how I'm capturing it if you're not creating it in the first place and you're not associating your brand with that problem.
Just a live ramp shout out to Rebecca Stone, who we both know, who's also a huddler and at Cisco Meraki these days. But I had her on the show when she was at Live Ramp.
Yes.
Back in the day when we actually did face-to-face interviews. Okay, we've got the recognition that third-party resources, buyers trust these sites, and they're really in the moment. This is a good time. I'm curious about this last fact about sales has dropped out of the top 5 sources of influence. And look, I mean, I got to tell you, I'm getting hounded by lots of salespeople who are calling me. Hey, we want to help you with your hiring. Hey, we want to, and some of them are current, companies that we work with
Right.
that like Perks, a payroll company, and they just don't stop calling, right? And it's annoying. I don't want to talk to them. So what are the implications of this? Because if buyers like me and you don't want to talk to salespeople, what's the solution here?
Yeah, I think so. What we've seen over time, right? So we've done this report for 6 years now, and when sales drops out, you understand this because then the other trend that we saw is that over 70% of buyers said that cold calling makes them less likely to buy from you. And so you're like, okay, that's validation.
Wait, it's a negative. It's not just, I'm not going to, don't call me. It's, I'm never going to buy from you.
Wow. Right. I'm less likely to buy from you because you're right. And again, I think that goes back to kind of like the creating of a demand where if I don't even know I have a problem and you're reaching out to me and you're saying, hey, like I can solve this, and I'm like, that's not relevant to me. And that's not what I'm in the market for. And so I think that's why that balance is so important from a marketing standpoint and just like overall your go-to-market team is that you're creating that problem, you're associating your brand with that. So you're intrinsically creating that association. So with sales, I think a couple things are happening. It's and you guys touched upon it, like intent data, right? And that orchestration and knowing more about the account and reaching out with them. And I think that like right message, right time totally makes sense. But it's also a trusted message. Like I think that if you're getting, I dodge calls all day, I dodge emails all day. Sometimes I feel like I come back from vacation one time and I just put all my email on opened. I was like, if people really need to get a hold of me, they'll get a hold of me. But I was like, most of these are just sales emails anyways. But when you're reaching out and there's actually some kind of buyer intent, and then you're using your customer voice or these proof points to actually validate your claims that you're making, because nobody likes to get sold to, right? And so I think the other piece of it is that it has to be coupled with value selling. And so when you think about budgets are tighter, you're not just selling to whoever your target buyer is, you're selling to the CFO. right? And so I think about the role of sales is no longer the gatekeeper of product information. They have to be much more consultative and kind of experts, and they have to sell value, and that they have to sell that ROI. Because otherwise, that CFO is going to see, especially when you guys are talking about like enterprise software, where you're getting up into that like 100,000 or more, that CFO is looking at it and being like, okay, what's the ROI on this?
Yeah. I want to just put a pin on one thing. You mentioned that you did your survey. This is the 6th year in the row.
Yeah.
And for all of you out there who are thinking about doing market research, consider that fact and look at your research studies. How many have you done 6 years in a row? The value is compounding.
Yeah.
And every year it gets more. You don't get less PR, you get more PR. Your salespeople can use it more because you've tracked trends. So kudos to you, 6 years running. Nicely done. Okay, it's time for me to talk about CMO Huddles. Launched in 2020, CMO Huddles is an exclusive community of over 100 highly effective B2B CMOs who share, care, and dare each other to greatness. We just put a QR code. You can go straight to the website if you take a picture of that QR code. Anyway, one CMO described Huddles as a cross between an executive workshop and a therapy session. And given how hard things are getting out there, we just talked about that on the show, who doesn't need a little reassurance that they're not alone? Everything about CMO Huddles is designed to be a force multiplier, helping you to make faster, better, and more informed decisions. Since no CMO can outwork this crazy job, CMO Huddles is here to help you outsmart it. All right, let's bring Jon and Allyson back. So, my question for you both is, are you on the therapy side or the executive workshop side?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jon.
Yeah. So, I would say for me, more the workshop side. I love connecting with and sharing ideas with other CMOs. I think for me specifically, the most valuable thing has been really helping me to keep my pulse on, what CMOs are thinking and talking about, which helps me write better blog posts and things like that.
That's amazing. I love that. Allyson?
I think I'm on the therapy side. Maybe both. It kind of depends on the week. But I really like collaborating with other people and, like Jon said, hearing what other people are doing. But also it's, sometimes it's lonely on the marketing side of the house, and especially like TrustRadius, we're fully remote. So it's great to just talk to other marketers, talk shop with them. And yeah, it's been such an enjoyable experience.
I love it, and I appreciate both of your comments, and I appreciate both of your participation so much. CMO Huddles is better because you're part of it. Okay, so if you're a B2B CMO who can share, care, and dare with the best, do me a favor and check out cmohuddles.com. All right, we are back. Let's talk about the buying cycles. They're getting longer, and what are we doing? I've talked about this and written a lot about it, about this notion of a couple of things. One, an idea called speed to hero. And the idea not being speed of return on ROI, but how quickly can you make me, the primary buyer, look good in the company? But what are we going to do? Because if the buying cycles are getting longer, just because, is there anything we can do to accelerate and help the folks that are listening think about or try to accelerate their deal cycle? We'll start with Jon.
Yeah, I not to be too kind of a broken drum, but I think this is another problem with the old playbook, right? The old playbook is so focused only on pipeline creation that, we're missing out on these other opportunities to do things like pipeline acceleration. And it's exactly like we said, like even once the opportunity is created, marketing shouldn't stop. Just like on the line, the linemen, the wide receivers still put blocks out to help the person who's carrying the ball. Advertising can be a really effective way to make sure you're speaking to every member of the buying community, even the ones that the sales rep isn't speaking to at any given point in time. We've seen increases in deal velocity and win rates with, campaigns that marketers run, even to open opportunities in the buying cycle. The other quick strategy, I've always been a big fan of what I call stand-ups, where you get a sales rep and a marketer just talking about their accounts and on a regular basis, you can do that for your open opportunities, and find all sorts of amazing creative ways to unstick deals and connect to new members of the buying community. And it just involves getting marketing and sales talking together about accounts.
And I'm curious because I can imagine those meetings, but you've got, and both of you have a number of people on your team, and you've got one salesperson who's assigned to this particular account. Who's the marketing person that does that? I mean, is there a new title that we're going to call deal acceleration marketer?
For us, we just call them, it's our revenue marketers. And we don't have a separate ABM team or demand gen team. We don't have a separate field marketing team. What we do is we have marketers that are aligned to our sales groups. So we have an enterprise group, we have a mid-market group, and then we have an EMEA group. And it's those marketers that are doing their stand-ups with their sales counterparts.
Got it. So in theory, they are experts, at least, whether it's a region or it's a business size. Allyson, what about you?
We actually just call it integrated marketing. So I'm constantly just thinking about full funnel marketing. So I don't even break it out in like demand gen or it's just integrated marketing. And so we're thinking about the entire life cycle and into that opportunity. So it's not done when pipeline's created. It's not done when it's closed won, right? They're still your customer. You still want to make sure that they see that ROI. They're retaining them. You're expanding them. You're turning them into advocates. So I just really think about it from like an integrated marketing standpoint.
So one of the things that I've seen is that the salesperson doesn't know my business. They really don't. Their mission, they're getting paid to close the deal. And they haven't done their homework and they don't know the business. And so and it's one of the reasons that I want to talk to salespeople. So I'm wondering though, how that marketer knows that business any better and then the salesperson. And if you have the stand-up, Jon, and we have somebody who doesn't know the client very well or the industry very well, and you have a salesperson who doesn't know the thing, how are we going to make a progress there?
I think, that would be a problem if, nobody knows anything. And usually, I'm going to stick with my football analogy here. Your stand-up is your huddle before you kind of run the play. In a perfect world, the sales rep's the quarterback. Is ultimately saying, here's what we're going to do. We need to connect with that person and get them to like go to that, this dinner or something, whatever it is. And I think marketing's job is to bring the playbook, say, well, here are the things we can do. And then also then to help kind of execute those. So, if it's, and this is where you also get into like one-to-one and one-to-few, right? If this is really a target account and you've decided to put extra resources onto it, you probably have done some of that research into the company or the industry. But even if it's not one of those target accounts, I think the stand-up strategy can still work to accelerate deals. So,
and it's funny, as I was thinking about this, it's a perfect example of a great use of ChatGPT and AI is that so easily to put a dossier together on individuals or companies these days with quick things that they're facing. But Jon, as you're talking about playbook, I have this vision of the quarterback who flips up the little thing on his thing. He's got 100 plays right there, each with a code, and he's looking at the defense and making an audible at the last minute because they shifted. And I don't think marketers have 100 plays in their playbook. That's part one.
You probably have 5.
And so,
okay, an executive one-to-one reach out, a customized direct mail package, an invitation to a dinner, an offer for a trial or a competitive buyout, or that was off the top of my head in 10 seconds, right? Give me 10 minutes with my team. We could probably come up with another 10 good ones. But
that's you. You're like, you founded 2 companies. You're into this thing. Drop it down 2 levels. Are the people on your team able to do that?
Again, some of this isn't rocket science. Direct mail, executive outreach, a dinner.
Okay. So those are right. Those are sort of next steps in the process.
Right. An advertising campaign to the buying committee.
Yeah.
Are you able to get smarter about this too? Hey, we tried 3 dinners with this type of prospect. It didn't really work. How are you getting smarter about those 5 plays on the playbook. I mean, in football, you get real immediate feedback. That run up the middle did not work.
I mean, without going on a rat hole about my views on attribution, I think if it works, right? The rep tells you.
Okay.
I mean, yep, we had that dinner, the deal got unstuck. Great, let's do more of that.
And it's never just one thing, right? I think that there's no silver bullet here. And so I think as a marketer, you might run all 5 plays. Unlike a football team, you can run multiple plays at one time. And I think that even backing up before, it's like, this is why it's so, like, product marketing is so important, because if you think about it, if you don't really have that market intelligence, you don't have that competitive intelligence, that positioning, that messaging, then it makes those plays less effective downstream. If you're not really good at defining your ICP, so all of that, like, initial work that you do at the beginning to actually make sure you're going after the right accounts that are actually going to convert, and you actually have done that kind of pre-work, if you will, that makes, when you get down to that actual sales conversation, if you even get to that sales conversation, that much harder. So I think there's also a lot of work done on the product marketing side that's super important, that sets you up for success, downstream.
Totally. It's funny when you talk about not knowing which one thing. We had a very funny conversation in a huddle where they said, well, in the sales meeting where they had the dinner, was it the drink or the chocolate mousse that closed the deal? And it was, it's almost laughable, but that's the kind of attribution challenge.
Great analogy. I love that one.
Yeah.
So budgets are getting tighter. That's a reality. Look, my guess is about somewhere between 60 and 75% of the huddlers are looking at 10 to 25% cuts in their budget, and that has a ripple effect. So what advice do you have for these folks? And I want to think in the context of Jon, we've got problem creation, we've got, getting them to at least to a qualified lead, and then there's sort of deal acceleration. What do they need to be thinking about in terms of, so what is must have versus nice to have from a marketing standpoint right now? Allyson, you want to start with that one?
Yeah. I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, when if you're actually in the deal cycle and you're selling that value, and you have to start with ROI, and then that has to be essentially your success plan that your customer success team is implementing. And so I think people, like I said, like, you're selling to the CFO at this point. And so I think it's super important when you're having this conversation. You're seeing this actually a lot, like, oh, an ROI calculator. If you put in these, inputs, this is how much ROI you can expect. And I think people are trying to do that more upfront, and then they're going to validate that with, like, their customer stories, their customer case studies, all of that. And that's going to be so important, because people are super skeptical. They know that they need to, they're still going to buy software, they're still going to buy whatever. But they want to make sure that they're going to get the ROI out of that. And then they want to make sure that other people have also seen that ROI, right? They're not going to just take that at face value. So I think when you couple all of that together, and then you have a customer success team that's like, okay, great. Here's what we said we were going to deliver. These are the things that we're going to do. We're going to make you successful. We're going to realize this ROI. And that's kind of like like I said, like that success plan. That's how the sales cycle, I feel like, is going to work going forward. And they're just going to want that type of information up front.
So I'm going to take a conclusion out of that may or may not be valid, but there are plenty of it. And I'm thinking about huddlers of the 100 companies. Mm-hmm. There are very few that actually target CFOs specifically. In fact, I can only think of maybe 2, which means 90 plus or 100 plus of them are targeting some other person who will get value out of whatever the company is selling. But the CFO in this case in time is going to be the ultimate decider. And so if you don't have an ROI calculator, if you can't point to business value, you're kind of dead in the water. And so that would help explain why that. And I think it's not just ROI, but it's how long does that take? As well, because ROI is great, but not if it's 18 months from now, which is so much. Okay, Jon, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just two, I'll make it brief, kind of, but just 2 quick things. I think the first one as a Demandbase, we actually made this a very intentional thing, something called Project Vital, where we went to our customers and got it in their words, in their language. Why is this, a must have? And then we really tried to synthesize that and distill that down into messaging for marketing and our go-to-market. The other quick point I would throw out there is actually from one of my old Marketo and Engagio investors, Tae-hee Nam from Storm Ventures. He's been talking a lot about the importance of not just having what he calls, he separates what he calls the date wow from the merry wow. Which is, the merry wow is the thing that makes the customer fall in love with this, and you have to have it. But you can't get to that if you can't get past the first demo, and that you also need, what he calls the date wow, which is often different. It's, and it's the thing that's going to just make that first gatekeeper so excited that they have to move forward. So encourage people to think about, that all the pieces of that process.
Oh God, I love that metaphor. I'll have to share that with my wife. Definitely date wow, marry wow. But yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And again, it speaks to this is a process that goes along. Okay, well, as we always do on this show, we just randomly, not completely randomly, because I do believe that Ben Franklin was America's first chief marketing officer, and he had the most difficult marketing challenge ever, which is to sell a revolution to a king. Having said that, what would Ben say? He would say, speak not, but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. And if there's one takeaway from this show, it is about making sure that you are delivering value to your customers and prospects through all of your marketing. All right, with that, let's start with Allyson. Final words of wisdom for CMOs regarding B2B buying trends. What advice do you have for them looking to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's give buyers what they want. If they want product information, make sure that's readily available. That will help build trust, and partner with your sales team in terms of making sure that they're driving value, they're selling value, and work with your customer success team. Be a partner through that entire customer lifecycle.
I love it. Yeah, there is no handoff anymore. That is a key message. If you have one take, no handoff, your job does not end. It doesn't even end when the deal is closed, because you're now getting into customer marketing and we need your testimonials. So, okay, Jon, final words of wisdom.
I think always be learning. I mean, the world is moving fast. It's changing. As I've said, the old playbook isn't working anymore and we need a new playbook. So always be learning. And as part of that, anybody here is always learning as part of CMO Huddles. That's fantastic. I'm part and help lead a community we call Rev Circle, which is another, community where go-to-market executives are sharing ideas. Anybody who wants an invite to that, just send me a message on LinkedIn and I will get you added to that Slack community.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And also the always be learning portion of it. One of the great joys of my life with CMO Huddles is that I get to sit with CMOs every single week and learn what it is that they're doing and thinking about and how they're solving all of these challenges. So, Jon, Allyson, you are both great sports. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. Please join us in 2 weeks when we'll be talking about marketing's role in sales enablement with Sarah Larson, Carlos Carvajal, and Peter Finter. Okay, cue the music. Oh, CMO Huddles Studio is produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our production assistant is Laura Parkin. If you'd like to learn more about CMO Huddles, visit cmohuddles.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser. And until next time, keep on sharing, caring, and daring each other